Episode 9. Luis Fernando remains deeply affected by Paula's death. Alone in his office, he looks through old memories, holds the necklace he made from her wedding ring, and stares at a photograph of their child. When Mercedes calls him, he quickly composes himself. She brings him documents concerning the ranch and raises concerns about their finances, including the money lost to Martín González. Luis reassures her that their lawyer is still searching for him and insists that someone like Martín will eventually return and be caught. Elsewhere, Herminia complains to Fuensanta about the trouble involving Osvaldo and Pedro. While the women talk casually, Pedro is being brutally beaten by police officers inside his cell, with a bag placed over his head. Meanwhile, Gennaro, Gabriel, and Cosme discuss the situation privately. Gabriel is determined to make Pedro pay for hurting Osvaldo, while Gennaro warns them that they must be careful not to attract too much attention. He reminds Gabriel that whatever Osvaldo does could endanger their businesses and everything they have been hiding. At the ranch, Domenica prepares to go into town despite Pilar's pleas for her to stay and rest. Domenica refuses to remain silent while Pedro suffers an injustice. She argues that Nieves could have been seriously injured and believes Pedro deserves protection. At the police station, Domenica confronts Gennaro for doing nothing to help Pedro. Gennaro claims the matter is being handled, but Cosme and Gabriel insist that Osvaldo's injuries are severe enough to keep Pedro in jail. Domenica immediately demands a proper medical examination and challenges Cosme for allowing Pedro to be detained without following legal procedure. When they claim there is no doctor available, Domenica decides to find one herself. That night, she goes to Luis Fernando's house and asks for his help. Luis is surprised to see her, especially since he answers the door without a shirt, but Domenica quickly explains the situation. She tells him that Pedro has been accused of trying to kill Osvaldo and asks him to examine both men so the truth can be established. Luis agrees to help. Meanwhile, Chiara grows even closer to Gennaro. After he returns to the ranch frustrated by Domenica's interference, Chiara corners him, flirts with him, and kisses him. Their attraction deepens, and the two become more openly connected. At Osvaldo's house, Gabriel instructs his son to exaggerate his pain when Luis examines him. He warns Osvaldo to cry, shout, and pretend his injuries are worse than they are because Gabriel secretly ordered Pedro to be beaten in jail. Mercedes visits Prudencio and tells him what happened. Adelaide overhears the conversation and feels guilty when she learns that Pedro's fight with Osvaldo was connected to protecting Prudencio. Prudencio later agrees to give a statement about what he witnessed. At the police station, Domenica insists on seeing Pedro. The officers initially refuse, but she threatens to report them to their superiors for violating his rights. When she is finally allowed into the cell, she is horrified by Pedro's condition. His face and body are covered in bruises, yet the officers claim he simply fell. Domenica asks Pedro directly what happened, but he remains silent. His refusal to speak makes her suspect that he is protecting someone. Luis examines Osvaldo and quickly discovers that his injuries are not as serious as Gabriel claimed. He also learns that Osvaldo pulled a knife during the fight and that there was a witness. This changes everything, as it proves Pedro may have acted in self-defense. Gabriel becomes furious with his son for lying and carelessly losing the knife that could now be used as evidence against him. Luis then examines Pedro and notices severe bruising around his abdomen. He concludes that Pedro's injuries could not have come from an accidental fall. The police attempt to pressure Luis into supporting their story, but he refuses. He promises to prepare a proper medical report and warns that if the authorities ignore the evidence, he and Domenica will report the case to higher officials. Mercedes and Prudencio arrive with food and blankets for Pedro. Mercedes becomes emotional after seeing his condition. Pedro finally admits that he kept quiet because the officers threatened Nieves. His silence was meant to protect her. With Luis's medical report and Prudencio's testimony, Domenica and Luis pressure the authorities to release Pedro. Luis later informs him that he will not be spending another night in jail. After his release, Pedro goes to visit Nieves, who is recovering well. They tease each other about their injuries and are caught in an awkward moment by Nicolasa. Pedro quickly insists that nothing romantic is happening and claims he sees Nieves only as a friend, or even a sister. Gennaro, Gabriel, and Cosme regroup to discuss their next move. Gabriel is already facing criticism because of Osvaldo's lies, but Gennaro insists they cannot lose control. He tells them that they must follow his plan, get rid of Luis Fernando, and prevent Domenica from discovering the truth hidden in the ranch's invoices and financial records. Gennaro believes they may even benefit if Luis eventually sells his land to Domenica, allowing them to profit from both properties. Although Gabriel and Cosme are uneasy about the plan, they remain silent. At the disputed lagoon, Luis tries to repair the fences that were torn down. Domenica arrives and says they have not had the chance to speak properly because of Pedro's case. She asks how much she owes him for his help, but Luis is offended by the suggestion that everything between them must be reduced to money. Their conversation turns into another argument about the land. Both accuse the other of being unreasonable, and the discussion ends with them declaring themselves enemies once again. Luis later gathers everyone at Espejo de Luna and tells his workers to arm themselves. He makes it clear that the weapons are only for protection and restraint, not for attacking anyone. Mercedes strongly disagrees, reminding him that he is a respected and award-winning doctor, not a violent man. Luis insists that he has not changed, but says he must defend his family, his workers, and what belongs to them. Mercedes also worries that the ranch has no real future because they lack the money needed to restore it. Luis remains hopeful and promises that the property can become a successful investment once their problems are resolved. Meanwhile, Kiera visits Herminia's shop and meets Gabriel. She makes it clear that she is nothing like Domenica. Gabriel welcomes her warmly and proudly tells her he is a singer. Kiera asks him to perform a special song for her. However, Pedro later reports to Gennaro that he has completed the task assigned to him. When Pedro says he plans to leave for a while, Gennaro stops him and angrily demands to know why he told Domenica about his unpaid wages. He grabs Pedro by the neck and orders him to hand over half of the money Domenica pays him. But, for the first time, Pedro refuses to submit as easily as before. Gennaro reminds him that he has controlled and beaten him since childhood and claims that both power and the law are on his side. Domenica later visits Herminia's shop. Herminia thanks her for withdrawing the complaint against Osvaldo, but Domenica makes it clear that she did it for Pedro, not because she cares about Osvaldo. She advises Herminia to guide her son before his behavior becomes even worse. Domenica then confronts Herminia over spreading rumors about her broken engagement. Herminia offers a careless apology, but Domenica shocks her by announcing that she plans to rename her ranch from La Joya to La Abandonada, which means the abandoned one. Kiera approaches Domenica afterward and asks about Luis. Domenica says he has declared war against her and insists there is no possibility of friendship between them. Meanwhile, At Espejo de Luna, Pedro approaches Bartolo to propose peace between the workers. Bartolo initially points a gun at him, believing Pedro has come to cause trouble. Pedro explains that he only wants a truce. Luis reminds Bartolo that the weapons are meant for protection, not aggression. Pedro apologizes for the chaos caused by his fight and arrest, but Luis tells him the larger conflict is really between him and Domenica. When Pedro mentions that Domenica has promised to pay him the wages he is owed, Luis is surprised. Mercedes also reacts with disbelief when she hears the news. Realizing Pedro needs a fresh start, Luis offers him work at Espejo de Luna Ranch. Pedro gratefully accepts but explains that he must first return to La Jolla, inform the others, and collect his belongings. Luis agrees and jokes that he should pack quickly before someone burns his things, making everyone laugh. Domenica and Chiara later have a video call with Ernesto. Domenica asks about Andres and requests help obtaining the ranch documents, the land records, and a full report concerning Pedro. Chiara also calls Sylvia, asking whether there have been any updates about the pregnant woman who was struck outside the hospital. Sylvia says the case is old and has already been closed. Chiara then asks about Max. Sylvia says she has not heard from him but has met someone connected to the restaurant where Max and Raphael worked, giving her a possible way to trace him. Chiara desperately hopes Max can be found so he will return the money he stole from her. Sylvia mocks her for handing over her fortune while having nowhere secure to live herself. Chiara becomes angry but later apologizes, explaining that she is under pressure. She also mentions that Ernesto is coming to the ranch. When Sylvia assumes Chiara likes him, Chiara admits she is only playing with Ernesto and reveals that another man has caught her attention, a doctor who strongly dislikes Domenica. She plans to visit his ranch. Elsewhere, Adelaide visits Osvaldo. He angrily asks why she has come and lashes out over everything happening to him. Adelaide apologizes, holds his hands, and tells him that she loves him. Osvaldo softens, closes the door, and kisses her. Episode 10. Adelaide's visit to Osvaldo ends in disaster when Herminia catches them together. Furious, she accuses Adelaide of being a gold digger who has brought nothing but trouble into her son's life. Although Adelaide insists she never meant to hurt anyone, Osvaldo unexpectedly sides with his mother, blaming Adelaide for everything that has happened between him and Pedro. Heartbroken, Adelaide is thrown out of the house, while Osvaldo later turns his anger on Herminia for interfering in his life. Back at La Abandonada Ranch, Rosita reminds Domenica of the plant she promised her before expressing her worries about the growing conflict between Domenica and Luis Fernando. The little girl reveals that she overheard Luis telling his workers to carry guns, fearing the two rivals are heading toward violence. Touched by Rosita's concern, Domenica assures her that neither she nor Luis wants bloodshed and promises that everything will be resolved peacefully. Meanwhile, Luis and Prudencio wait near the disputed boundary, where Luis had warned Domenica not to let her cattle graze. When Gennaro deliberately drives the herd across the land, Luis fires a warning shot into the air, frightening the animals and forcing Gennaro to retreat. Unknown to everyone else, Gennaro later shoots one of the cattle himself and even fires through his own hat to frame Luis for attacking him. Elsewhere, Chiara visits Mercedes and introduces herself as Domenica's cousin. Unlike Domenica, she presents herself as someone who wants peace between the two families. Mercedes admits she wishes Luis would sell Espejo de Luna Ranch, but explains that her late husband dreamed of restoring the property, and Luis is determined to fulfill that dream. Secretly, Chiara promises to convince both Domenica and Luis to settle the dispute. At the ranch, Pedro informs Domenica that he has accepted Luis Fernando's offer to work at Espejo de Luna. Although Domenica reminds him she promised to repay all the wages he was owed, Pedro explains that Luis treated him with kindness and respect and that he genuinely wants the opportunity. Hurt by his decision, Domenica reluctantly lets him go. Soon afterward, Gennaro rushes to Domenica with his damaged hat, claiming Luis shot at both him and her cattle. Outraged, Domenica accuses Luis of being a hypocrite after preaching against violence. However, Luis insists he only fired into the air as a warning and denies harming either Gennaro or the livestock. Prudencio later confirms hearing 2 additional gunshots after Luis had already fired, convincing Luis that Gennaro staged the entire incident to turn Domenica against him. Meanwhile, Pedro visits Nieves to say goodbye before leaving the ranch. Their playful conversation is interrupted when Gennaro corners Pedro and threatens him once again. He warns that if Pedro tells Luis or anyone else the truth about his abuse, Nieves will suffer the consequences. Refusing to be intimidated any longer, Pedro tells Gennaro that one day he will answer for all his crimes before walking away. Domenica later confronts Luis over the shooting, but neither is willing to believe the other's version of events. Their heated argument only deepens the hostility between them. Elsewhere, Prudencio learns that Adelaide secretly visited Osvaldo. Hurt and disappointed, he confronts his granddaughter, accusing her of throwing away the values he raised her with. Adelaide insists nothing improper happened between them and tells her grandfather that he is simply trying to control her life out of fear of being left alone. Their emotional argument leaves both of them heartbroken. Later that evening, Luis goes looking for Prudencio, who has gone to Gabriel's bar to drink away his worries. At the same time, Domenica and Chiara also arrive at the bar. During the night's entertainment, Gabriel performs a cruel song mocking Domenica's humiliation after being abandoned at the altar. As the crowd laughs and cheers, Domenica is publicly humiliated once again. Episode 11. Small Diamond. Determined not to be broken by the past, Domenica stands before everyone at the bar and proudly declares that she is indeed the abandoned woman, refusing to let anyone's mockery define her. When she discovers the humiliating song was requested by someone else, she mistakenly believes Luis orchestrated it. Furious over Gabriel's cruel behavior, Luis punches him, sparking a violent brawl that only ends when Cosme threatens to call the police and Prudencio drags Luis away. Outside, Domenica finally breaks down in tears, confessing to Chiara that despite her strength, she has never truly recovered from being abandoned on her wedding day. Back at Espejo de Luna, Ernesto arrives with legal documents to help Domenica resolve the ranch's land dispute and announces plans to install internet service. Meanwhile, Gennaro resigns, claiming he cannot continue working for someone who falsely accused him. Although Chiara blames Luis for everything that has happened, Domenica calmly accepts Gennaro's decision. However, after Nieves begs him to stay, he changes his mind. Before leaving, Domenica gives him one last task: to install the new La Abandonada sign at the ranch entrance. The following morning, Luis comforts Prudencio after his disagreement with Adelaide, reminding him that rebellious teenagers often still love the people who care for them. Unbeknownst to them, Adelaide overhears the conversation and quietly realizes how deeply her grandfather loves her. Small Diamond. Elsewhere, Pedro asks Diana and later Mercedes to help him write a heartfelt thank you letter to Nicolasa because he cannot read or write. As internet service is installed at the ranch, Chiara mischievously sets the Wi-Fi password as a reference to Domenica's abandoned wedding, despite her mother's objections. Soon after, the ranch veterinarian arrives with a massive unpaid bill, leaving Mercedes worried about Espejo de Luna's future. At the bar, Chiara secretly meets Gabriel again. Their flirtation nearly leads to a kiss before Herminia unexpectedly interrupts them, immediately becoming suspicious. Meanwhile, Domenica visits Pedro and gives him a check covering every cent of the wages he was denied. Luis wrongly believes she is trying to win Pedro back, warning him not to fall into any trap. Domenica is then reunited with her beloved godfather, Andre, who reveals he hopes to help settle the conflict with Luis Fernando while also discussing his retirement and the future of his business. Pedro later surprises Luis by proposing to invest his newly recovered wages into Espejo de Luna as a business partner. Although hesitant at first, Luis accepts the offer, giving Pedro the chance to build a better future while helping save the ranch, much to Mercedes' delight. Meanwhile, Gennaro and Gabriel begin creating fake receipts and invoices to deceive Domenica. Gabriel worries she may not believe them, but Gennaro is confident she will, reminding him that she already believed she had burned his records. Gennaro also questions Gabriel about publicly humiliating Domenica with the song, but Gabriel avoids giving him a truthful answer. Small diamond at Luis's home, Pedro impresses both Luis and Mercedes with practical ideas for improving the plantation, inspired by advice Luis's late father once shared. They encourage Pedro to learn how to read and write so he can properly manage the business and his future profits, and Pedro gratefully thanks them for giving him a second chance. That evening, everyone gathers for dinner at Espejo de Luna. Pilas expresses her gratitude for having the family together, while Domenica thanks everyone for believing in her dream. Ernesto suggests Chiara should use her money to start a business, but she quickly changes the subject and encourages him to visit more often. Nicole fondly recalls the nearby lagoon and waterfalls where Domenica's parents once spent happy moments together. Later, Luis finds his mother searching through cookbooks. Mercedes explains that she wants to prepare something special for Pedro to thank him for saving her life. Luis jokingly accuses her of loving Pedro more than her own son, but she reassures him that simple acts of kindness are her way of showing appreciation. As Ernesto and Domenica continue searching through old documents, frustration grows when they fail to find clear proof of the ranch's boundaries. Andre reveals that Domenica's father only received a letter from the previous owner rather than official land deeds. Gennaro then returns with the remaining receipts Domenica believed she had destroyed. After Domenica admits her mistake, Andre points out that Gennaro's knowledge of the land could prove invaluable, and Gennaro agrees to help them identify the property's true boundaries. Small diamond elsewhere, Nicole receives Pedro's heartfelt letter. Knowing he cannot read or write, Nieves eagerly asks Nicole to read it aloud. However, when the letter mentions how much Pedro misses Nieves, Nicole deliberately skips that part, leaving Nieves believing Pedro never thought of her. That night, Chiara secretly tries to leave the house but is surprised by Ernesto, who presents her with a beautiful hat as a gift. Touched by the gesture, Chiara happily accepts it, and the two share a warm embrace, unaware that Gennaro is secretly watching them. The next morning, a jealous Gennaro confronts Chiara, demanding to know why she never met him the previous night and questioning her relationship with Ernesto. Chiara insists there is nothing between them and teasingly tells him she prefers fearless men. Consumed by jealousy, Gennaro pulls her close and kisses her. Seeking comfort in memories of her childhood, Domenica visits the lagoon where her parents once spent happy days with her and decides to go for a swim. Elsewhere, Chiara meets Mercedes again and asks whether she has spoken to Luis about helping reconcile him with Domenica. Mercedes admits she has not but believes things are slowly improving, especially after receiving money that will help the ranch. She also opens up about Luis's painful past, revealing that he lost his young son, Jose Maria. Chiara comforts her and sincerely hopes Luis will one day find happiness again. Small diamond by coincidence, Luis arrives at the same lagoon to catch crayfish. While swimming, he unexpectedly encounters Domenica, who accuses him of spying on her. Luis insists he is there by chance and bluntly tells her that she means nothing to him, even joking that he would rather kiss her horse than kiss her. In a moment of pure impulse, Domenica silences him by kissing him. To her surprise, Luis immediately kisses her back, and the two share a passionate kiss. Episode 12. After sharing an unexpected kiss in the lagoon, Domenica is left completely shaken. Embarrassed by what happened, she orders Luis Fernando to leave so she can return to shore. Later, once they've both gotten dressed, Luis approaches her again, hoping they can calmly talk about the moment they shared. Domenica apologizes, insisting the kiss was simply a mistake brought on by the way he constantly gets under her skin. Curious about the feelings the kiss stirred inside him, Luis gently pulls her close and kisses her again. This time, Domenica responds before quickly pulling away, warning him not to read too much into it. Although neither of them is willing to admit it, the attraction between them is becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Mercedes confides in Chiara about her greatest wish, to see Luis happy again after everything he has endured. She hopes that one day he will find a woman who truly loves him, build a family, and finally move on from his painful past. Chiara listens sympathetically, secretly pleased by Mercedes' growing trust in her. Elsewhere, Osvaldo loses his temper with Herminia when she questions where he is going, insisting that he is old enough to live his own life without her interference. At the cornfield, Adelaide brings lunch to Prudencio and apologizes for the argument they had earlier. Prudencio also apologizes, explaining that he only wants to protect her from making painful mistakes. While they reconcile, Luis remains lost in thought at the lagoon, remembering both his kiss with Domenica and the promise he made to his late wife, Paula, that he would one day allow himself to love again. Back at La Abandonada Ranch, Gennaro notices that one of the buttons on Domenica's blouse is undone after her swim. He quietly points it out, warning that people might get the wrong impression. Embarrassed, Domenica buttons her blouse and quickly walks away. Meanwhile, Chiara visits Mercedes once again. Luis arrives home carrying crayfish and is surprised to find her there. Mercedes explains that Chiara only came to visit, while Chiara jokes that she isn't there to cause trouble like her cousin. Later, Mercedes tells Chiara that Luis's moods have become unpredictable since losing Paula. Chiara promises she is always willing to listen if he ever needs someone to talk to. Back at the ranch, Domenica meets with Ernesto, Pilar, and Andres, who inform her that the orphanage has begun losing sponsors and financial support. Without hesitation, Domenica decides to cover all the expenses herself, even if it means using the profits from her ranch. She declares that the orphanage children are her true heirs, since she no longer believes she will ever have children of her own. Pilar is saddened by her words, reminding her that becoming a mother was once her greatest dream. Later, Chiara continues trying to win Luis's trust. She tells him that although Domenica invited her family to live at the ranch, her cousin has become consumed by resentment. She admits she has advised Domenica to let go of the past and move forward with her life. Mercedes then suggests that Luis show Kiera around the ranch. Luis reluctantly agrees and gives Kiera a tour of Espejo de Luna Ranch. He introduces her to the horses and later takes her to the lagoon. Hoping to grow closer to him, Kiera suggests they go swimming together. When Luis refuses, she playfully pulls him into the water. Although Kiera laughs off the incident, Luis feels uncomfortable and leaves her behind, making it clear that he has no interest in encouraging her advances. Elsewhere, Nicolasa and Pilar discuss Domenica's future. Pilar worries that Domenica has given up on ever having a family, while Nicolasa reminds her that she is still healing from Max's betrayal and deserves time to rebuild her life. Later, Domenica calls the children at the orphanage and spends time chatting, telling them stories and making them laugh. During one of her stories, which unknowingly mirrors her own complicated relationship with Luis, the children excitedly insist that the two main characters should give love a chance, leaving Domenica smiling despite herself. Pedro later asks Domenica to witness the paperwork for his new business partnership. When she learns he has officially become Luis Fernando's business partner, her mood instantly changes. Convinced Luis is taking advantage of Pedro, she refuses to sign the documents. At that very moment, Luis and Kiera arrive on horseback. Domenica immediately questions why the two of them are together. Kiera explains that Luis was simply showing her around the ranch after Mercedes suggested it. Luis refuses to justify himself, saying his business is none of Domenica's concern before complimenting Kiera and leaving. Hurt and jealous, Domenica refuses to listen to Pedro's explanation and storms away. Back at the ranch house, Domenica confronts Kiera about spending time alone with Luis. The conversation quickly turns into a heated argument, with Kiera accusing Domenica of letting Max's betrayal poison every relationship in her life. Pilar tries to calm them, but Kiera angrily walks away. Meanwhile, Adelaide secretly meets Osvaldo in the cornfield. Osvaldo apologizes for failing to defend her when his mother falsely accused her. Adelaide forgives him, believing he was only trying to protect their relationship. The two share a passionate kiss, but just as the moment becomes more intimate, Simone secretly throws a stone nearby, startling them and forcing them apart before anyone discovers them. Later that night, Kiera vents to Pilar, insisting that Domenica is only jealous because she spent time with Luis. She argues that just because Domenica refuses to give any man a chance doesn't mean everyone else should do the same. While Pilar gently comforts her daughter, Kiera secretly smiles, convinced that her plan to come between Domenica and Luis is slowly beginning to work. Episode 13. As everyone gathers for lunch at Espejo de Luna Ranch, Mercedes warmly welcomes Pedro into the family and celebrates his new partnership with Luis Fernando. Grateful for the fresh start, Pedro happily admits that his life has completely changed. He now has a steady job, new clothes thanks to Luis, and hopes people will finally see him for the man he truly is. Prudencio proudly welcomes him to this new chapter of his life. Their peaceful meal is interrupted when Domenica arrives with Andres carrying what they believe are the official deeds proving that the disputed land, including the lagoon, belongs entirely to her. Luis is stunned and immediately retrieves his own title deeds, convinced they prove exactly the opposite. After carefully comparing both documents, everyone is left confused. Luis's papers show that the northern side of the lagoon belongs to his family, while Domenica's documents claim ownership of the entire area. Although Andres suggests that resolving the dispute through the courts could take years, Domenica insists she is prepared to fight for as long as necessary. Luis agrees to let the law decide, leaving the meeting with tensions higher than ever. Afterwards, Andres warns Domenica not to let her anger push her into making reckless decisions. He reminds her that legal battles require patience, but Domenica insists she will always fight for what rightfully belongs to her. Back at La Abandonada Ranch, Domenica explains the situation to Gennaro. Secretly terrified, Gennaro realizes that if the documents undergo a thorough investigation, his forgery could be exposed. Once alone with Roque, he proudly admits that he forged the documents given to Domenica and hopes they will fool everyone. However, he also confesses that he now needs someone inside Luis's ranch to keep him informed, suggesting that Roque use Pedro to gain access to Espejo de Luna. Meanwhile, Pilar confronts Domenica over her treatment of Kiera. Although Domenica apologizes for their recent argument, Pilar insists the issue runs much deeper. She believes Kiera only wants peace between the two families and warns that if the conflict with Luis continues, she and Kiera may have no choice but to leave the ranch. Hurt by Pilar's harsh words, Domenica realizes their relationship is no longer as close as it once was. Elsewhere, Andres and Nicolasa discuss the land dispute. Andres believes the conflict could easily be resolved if Luis and Domenica agreed to share or divide the property. Nicolasa points out that Domenica refuses to listen to reason, adding that she suspects Domenica's jealousy began the moment she saw Kiera spending time with Luis. At Espejo de Luna, Mercedes continues teaching Pedro how to read and write, encouraging him to build a brighter future. Kiera arrives and pretends to be concerned about her relationship with Domenica. She tells Mercedes that her cousin has become angry simply because Luis showed her around the ranch. Mercedes reassures her before taking her to see Luis, as Kiera now claims she has developed back pain. Meanwhile, Domenica visits Nicolasa in the kitchen to borrow some sugar for Luis. Before she leaves, Nicolasa stops her for a heartfelt conversation. She points out that Domenica spends almost every moment talking about Luis and wonders if that means he is becoming more important to her than she realizes. Domenica laughs off the suggestion, insisting Luis is simply her biggest problem. However, she eventually admits that his comment about preferring to kiss his horse rather than kiss her deeply wounded her pride. She then shocks Nicolasa by confessing that she kissed Luis first, and that he kissed her back. Hidden behind the doorway, Nieves secretly overhears the entire conversation. At the same time, Luis examines Kiera's back and finds nothing serious, advising her to use ointment and painkillers. Before leaving, Kiera once again tries to charm him by discussing the land dispute and then unexpectedly kisses him on the cheek. Although Luis remains polite, he makes it clear that he has no intention of backing down in the battle over the disputed property. Elsewhere, Prudencio quietly watches Pedro practicing his writing. He reflects on how quickly Pedro's life has changed, from a poor laborer with nothing to a respected businessman and Luis's partner. Pedro thanks Prudencio for every act of kindness he secretly showed him over the years, including the food, clothes, and money Adelaide used to deliver on his behalf. Touched by Pedro's gratitude, Prudencio tells him he owes him nothing. Later, Domenica meets Maria, Herminia's young daughter, who is struggling to deliver goods on her bicycle after Osvaldo once again abandoned his responsibilities. When Maria realizes she is speaking to the famous Domenica Montero, she apologizes for Gabriel's humiliating song at the bar. Showing the bruises left by her father, Maria sadly explains that women in their town are expected to remain silent and obedient. Deeply moved by the young girl's courage, Domenica tells Maria that no woman deserves to be treated that way. Maria replies that this is exactly why she wanted to meet her. She admires the way Domenica stands up to powerful men and hopes to become just as brave one day. Although humbled by the praise, Domenica reminds Maria that she is far from perfect, but encourages her never to accept disrespect simply because she is a woman.